This is Amelia from Amelia Voice, and today I'll tell you a story that will make your heart ache and your soul burn for justice. It begins with a cap and gown on a bedroom door like a promise no one kept. A tassel pretending to be celebration. A daughter pulling color out of silence while her parents knelt to practicality. The morning of commencement, my phone lit with my mother's name. I expected a pep talk. Instead, a sigh cold as tile. "We're not coming," she said, words clipped like coupons. "An art degree? Be serious. Your father can't spend another day applauding something that won't feed you." After she hung up, the room echoed like a church after everyone leaves, the robe swaying in the draft as if trying to nod for me, as if it could do the clapping they refused to. I still walked. I still smiled. The auditorium roared for other people's last names. Cameras winked like stars with favorite children. I searched the seats where they should have been and found 2 empty spaces in a sea of applause, a smile with teeth knocked out. Later, under a sky that felt too big for my small win, I pressed my palms to the program until ink bled into my skin. So at least something of that day would leave a mark. Lena found me by the sculpture garden with a paper cup of lemonade and a ferocious hug. "They're wrong," she said, crisp as a verdict. And if they're not here to hear this, I'll say it twice. I moved into a studio that summer, a cracked brick loft whose windows rattled when buses growled past. I tacked canvases to the walls and turned sleepless hours into storms of oil and light. Commissions paid in coffee and kindness kept the power on, a cafe owner wanting latte art on a real canvas, a neighbor with a Polaroid of her dog. Mondays, my mother sent job postings with dental. Thursdays, my father forwarded op-eds about the creative market. Every ping felt like a tiny gavel. Some nights I stood by the sink, staring at the bruised bananas and faithful pasta, and thought of calling them to say, "Fine, you win. I'll come home and be small." Instead, I painted the ache until it looked like weather. Then came the email. Emerging Voices, Summer Show. A gallery where sidewalks glimmered had seen a piece I posted in a student forum. They wanted 3 works. I knew 2. Hold My Sky. A horizon tugged upward by stubborn blues, and Feral Apology, jagged teal and ash with a smear of red like a wiped mouth. The 3rd would be the empty chair, the room that swallowed footsteps, the whistle of a house after someone slams the door. I painted until the brush stuck to my palm, scraped, started again. I called it the thing they called me, the name they threw like a rock through my window. I named it Useless. Opening night smelled like lemon oil and champagne. The gallery hummed. People drifted with the soft murmur of tourists at an aquarium. I watched faces stop at my walls. Lips parted. Eyebrows lifted. A woman with copper hair leaned so close I saw my name reflected in her lenses. Lena, thrifted silk blouse, righteous eyeliner, squeezed my hand each time someone lingered. "See?" she whispered. "Your work keeps time." I nodded, trying to keep my ribs from cracking with relief. Then a man in a dark suit stilled in front of the 3rd piece. He had the quiet of money, shoes like secrets, voice like a soft agreement. He didn't take a photo. He just looked, the way you look at a closed door and remember what's behind it. The gallery owner drifted over, a diamond chip winking in her smile, and introduced him with the care of someone handling a lit match near silk. He asked me about the chair, about the shadow in the corner where color pooled like swallowed words, about the way the window frame cut the painting in thirds as if measuring something you couldn't weigh. Every question felt like someone finally speaking my language. They came. Not to graduation, but to this, arriving in their Sunday best like a storm that RSVP'd late. My mother's necklace clicked against the frame as she read my placard. My father crossed his arms, staring at the empty chair as if it dared him to sit. The room shrank. Lena's fingers found mine. "Want me to throw them out?" she said, half feral, wholly loyal. I shook my head. I wanted them to stand there and feel it. The work, the hours, the texture of loneliness you could sand a table with. I wanted the word they loved, useless, to grow teeth and follow them home. The man in the suit nodded at the owner. "We should talk," he said, eyes not leaving the painting. My mother's gaze slid to me, soft with a sudden, unwelcome uncertainty. My father's mouth twitched, like a wall realizing a window had been cut into it. "What do you call it?" the man asked, still studying the chair. I could have said untitled. I could have said nothing. The truth rose anyway. "Useless," I said. "It's called useless." My mother's breath hitched. My father shifted, a man feeling the ground he poured decide to become an ocean. The word didn't feel like surrender anymore. It felt like thunder finding a mountain. The owner poised a pen over a tiny placard while phones tilted and the room held its breath. Somewhere a cork popped. Somewhere else my name did. My parents hovered at the edge of my weather, close enough to be rained on, far enough to pretend they weren't drenched. My phone buzzed against my palm, a new message from my mother, 3 words trembling on the screen. "We're outside. Proud." The period didn't belong. Pride doesn't hire punctuation to make it look legitimate. I slipped the phone into my pocket and faced the painting, the chair, the window, the shadow where I once hid my hurt. "We should talk," the buyer repeated, and the owner's smile brightened like a switch thrown. "If you're wondering what it cost to turn useless into something the room couldn't stop looking at, hold that breath with me, because the number didn't just change the painting. It turned the air into electricity. It rewired a family. It reached back to the empty seats and set them on fire. The number hung in the air like a secret too loud to whisper. $300,000, the curator repeated, making sure the decimal wasn't lost between disbelief and the clinking of glasses. The man in the suit extended his hand, a quiet certainty in his eyes that felt like closure and prophecy all at once. My parents froze mid-breath, mid-judgment, their faces the color of disbelief. My mother's lips parted, forming a soundless question, while my father's fingers clenched around the program until it wrinkled into confession. I wanted to savor it, the silence that followed, the brittle crumble of certainty they'd built their world on. 300,000? My father echoed, the words dragging like a chain across marble. The man smiled, polite and detached. "Art isn't about use. It's about feeling, and this piece, this one feels." He turned to me, hand still outstretched. "Congratulations, Miss Marin." I took it, my palm trembling, warmth buzzing like electricity through my bones. Cameras flashed. People clapped. Somewhere behind the applause, I heard my mother's voice crack as she whispered, "That's our daughter." For the first time, it didn't sound like a claim. It sounded like a question. Outside, the night city glowed like applause itself, neon streaks dripping down puddles, taxis humming low songs of hurry. I stood on the curb, clutching the gallery's check, the ink still fresh enough to smudge. Lena spun beside me, laughter and tears mixing into something that looked like victory. "You did it," she said. "They saw it." "They saw you." I smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was something sharper. "Yeah," I said softly. "Now they'll really look." Because revenge, I learned, isn't about shouting in someone's face. It's about making them watch you become the storm they swore would never rain. My parents approached, their footsteps hesitant. My mother's perfume hit first. Familiar, cloying, the smell of every childhood scolding wrapped in floral apology. "Amelia," she said, reaching for me as if I were still reachable. "We didn't know. We just wanted you to be secure." My father nodded beside her, his voice dry. "We only wanted what was best. You can't blame us for worrying." I let them stand there, 2 people who had mistaken control for love and disappointment for parenting. "You missed it," I said. My voice didn't shake. "You missed the moment you could have been proud before the world told you it was safe to be." They flinched, both of them, the words landing with a dull, honest weight. My mother's eyes glistened. "Can we talk? Maybe come home for dinner? We can celebrate properly. Home." I repeated, the word tasting foreign. "Home is where someone shows up for you. You made sure I didn't have one." I turned before she could cry, before his pride could find its footing again. Lena followed, quiet now, the way a friend steps softly around broken glass. We walked to the diner that had fed us through art school poverty, where tips were wishes folded into dollar bills. I ordered pancakes, extra syrup, because success should taste like something sticky and sweet and utterly mine. "You think they'll ever get it?" Lena asked, stirring her coffee. I looked at the check again, then at the reflection of my painting already trending online, its title like a ghost haunting every headline. "No," I said. "But that's the point." Over the next few weeks, life blurred. Interviews, invitations, strangers quoting my captions like scripture. A collector in Paris wanted prints. A podcast called me the girl who painted her pain into profit. My inbox drowned in congratulations from cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Even my father's voice appeared in a voicemail, hesitant, measured, asking if I could teach him a bit about the art world, as though it were a business course he'd overlooked. I didn't return the call. Instead, I threw myself into a new series, each painting heavier, darker, closer to confession. I called it Inheritance. The first piece showed a table set for 3, 2 plates empty, the third brimming with gold that melted into tears. The next, silence served cold, depicted a hallway collapsing inward, family portraits dripping off the walls. Critics called them raw. I called them therapy. Every sale funded the distance between who I was and who they tried to make me, until one day my mother showed up uninvited. She stood in the doorway of my studio, sunlight cutting through dust motes, her reflection fractured in the mirrored palette I used to mix pain into color. "Your father's been sick," she said. The words hit like a paintbrush dropped in solvent. Sharp, stinging, dissolving everything steady. "What kind?" I asked, not out of concern but duty. "Heart," she whispered. "Stress, mostly." "He talks about you, about the graduation." I stared at her, the woman who'd raised me to measure worth in salaries, now trembling in a space built entirely out of the dreams she once mocked. "Funny," I said. "I talk about that too." She blinked, searching my face for mercy. I didn't have any left to lend. But revenge, I knew, wasn't finished yet. It had just learned patience. I didn't see him for 2 months after that, but his name lingered in every voicemail my mother left, each one softer than the last, like she was practicing regret in increments. I tried to paint through it, but every stroke felt like dragging a knife through memory. "Heart," she had said, and I kept picturing it. The same heart that had once told me to pick a real career, now beating on borrowed time. Revenge had tasted sweet when it was public, when applause drowned out every ounce of hurt, but now it tasted metallic, heavy, like chewing on the keys to a house I'd burned down. The night before my next show, Inheritance 2, I got a text from her. "He wants to see you. Please." I ignored it. But at 3 a.m., I found myself standing in front of their house, the porch light still flickering the way it used to when I came home late from sketch class. Inside, he was smaller. The man who had once filled rooms with authority now seemed carved out, pale, his hands trembling as he reached for water. "So," he rasped, his voice rasping like sandpaper, "the famous artist comes home." I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "You missed the opening." His lips quirked, maybe trying for a smile. "Old habits die hard." Silence thickened the room. The TV hummed low. The air smelled of medicine and second chances. Finally, he said, "I was wrong." The words stumbled out like a confession escaping a prison. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment." I didn't see that I was the disappointment. My mother cried quietly beside him, tissue trembling like a flag of surrender. I didn't move. I'd wanted this moment for years, him on his knees, figuratively or otherwise, but now that it was here, it didn't heal. It hollowed. "You could have been proud when it mattered," I said. "You could have stood up for me before the price tag made it respectable." His eyes glistened with something beyond pride, fear, maybe. "You've done well," he whispered. "That's all a parent wants." "No," I said, voice cracking. "You wanted obedience, not success." I left before the tears came, because crying in front of him would have been a gift I no longer gave. Outside, the wind felt cold enough to scrape. I drove straight to my studio, turned on every lamp, and painted until sunrise. A mess of crimson and gray I called apology pending. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure painted in oil and exhaustion. Weeks passed. My father didn't call again, and I didn't ask if he could. My career climbed faster than I could breathe. Magazine spreads, late-night interviews, invitations to speak about resilience through creativity. They called me a symbol. I felt like a wound that had learned how to autograph itself. And then came the call. My mother's voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "He's gone." The brush fell from my hand, striking the floor like a gunshot. Gone. The word echoed through me, dragging every childhood memory with it. The lessons, the lectures, the laughter before it all soured. I drove to the funeral out of something that wasn't love but wasn't indifference either. People whispered when I entered, recognizing my face from headlines, not family photos. My mother's eyes found me across the aisle, swollen and soft. The casket sat open and I stared at him. No sound, no judgment, no fight left. "You always wanted an audience," I whispered under my breath. "Now you have one." After the burial, my mother approached me, fragile but composed. "He kept your articles," she said. "All of them. In a box under his bed." She pressed a folded note into my palm. "He wrote this before it got bad." I didn't read it there. I drove home, sat in the dark, and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "I saw the painting," it began. "The chair, the shadow, the way the window cut the light. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. You painted what we couldn't give you. Space to exist. I'm sorry. I wish I'd learned sooner that usefulness isn't the same as love." The tears came without permission, without elegance, raw and unedited. I pressed the letter to my chest and let the grief crawl out of me like something feral. For the first time, revenge felt small. It didn't undo the empty seats. It didn't fix the years I'd built alone. It just stood there, hollowed out by forgiveness I didn't know I was capable of feeling. When dawn came, I pinned the letter to my easel and began again. The painting that emerged wasn't sharp or bitter. It was soft, muted, almost kind. I called it Still Learning. Critics later said it was my most emotional work. They didn't know it was my father's goodbye turned into color. Still, part of me wasn't done. My mother had survived the fallout untouched, her guilt buried under apologies rehearsed in mirror glass. But guilt, like art, finds its way out. And I had one last piece to finish, the one that would make the world see what she'd done too. It took 6 months to complete the final piece, and every day of it felt like reopening a wound I swore had scarred. My studio became a battlefield of memory, paint-smeared rags like truce flags, turpentine that smelled like regret. My mother called often now, her voice gentler, as if talking to a stranger she was afraid to lose. "You don't have to keep painting us," she said once, half a plea, half a warning. But she didn't understand. I wasn't painting them anymore. I was painting what they'd made of me. The new work was monumental, spanning 3 canvases fused together like a triptych confession. The first showed a child standing beneath an archway of torn report cards, her shadow taller than her frame, shaped like the artist she would become. The second, a woman in a graduation gown dissolving into the background while 2 faceless figures walked away, their silhouettes outlined in cold gold. The third was what stopped even me, a dinner table for 2, candles unlit, chairs overturned, and in the center, a portrait within the portrait, my mother's reflection in a wine glass cracked right down the middle. I called the piece What Pride Costs. The gallery hosting it was the same one that had once changed my life, though now they called me our star. The opening night was electric, reporters, collectors, fans pretending to whisper while their phones recorded everything. I stood near the entrance trying to breathe through the chaos when I saw her. My mother dressed in gray, the same pearls she wore the day she told me art was useless. Her steps were hesitant, her posture carrying the kind of shame you can't disguise as dignity. When she reached the painting, her hand flew to her mouth. She didn't cry right away, she just stared, her reflection split by the wine glass that held her image captive. The crowd murmured, half pity, half awe. Someone whispered, "Is that her mother?" And the question hung in the air like smoke. She turned to me, eyes wet but fierce. "Why would you show this?" she asked. I met her gaze, steady as a nailed frame. "Because it's true. You think this makes you better?" Her voice cracked. "You think humiliating me makes you whole?" I stepped closer, close enough to see the tremor in her chin, the decades of denial finally collapsing. "No," I said. "It makes me free." The silence that followed was deafening. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and my mother backed away as though my truth had physically burned her. She left before the applause began. The next morning, headlines split down the middle. Some called it a daughter's brutal masterpiece, others, public exorcism masquerading as art. My phone buzzed nonstop. My inbox flooded with praise and condemnation in equal measure. And yet, none of it felt like victory. The price of truth, I realized, is that it doesn't return what it replaces. I went home that night and found an envelope wedged under my door. My mother's handwriting? Inside, a single line. "You've won, Amelia. I hope it was worth it." There was no signature, no address, just that. An echo of her voice breaking across the paper. I sat there for hours, the words pulsing in my head like a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. Worth it, was it? I looked around at the canvases, the awards, the interviews lined up for weeks, and all I saw were ghosts in frames. But ghosts, I realized, are proof that something mattered once. I picked up my brush again, not to fight, not to avenge, but to remember. The next collection wasn't about them. It was about healing. Colors softened. Shapes opened. Each stroke whispered forgiveness like a language I was finally fluent in. When critics asked about the shift, I told them truthfully, revenge is a fire that keeps you warm until you realize you're burning alone. Years later, when I stood at a retrospective of my work, someone asked what piece meant the most to me. I didn't point to the famous ones or the ones that made me rich. I pointed to a small canvas tucked in the corner, easily overlooked. A quiet portrait of two empty chairs side by side under a calm blue sky. No bitterness, no ghosts, just peace. I called it After Everything. As I looked at it, I imagined my parents sitting there, not in judgment, not in apology, just existing beside me in the silence I'd finally made beautiful. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to prove anything at all. This is Amelia from Amelia Voice, and if this story found you tonight, I hope you remember this. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't triumph, it's serenity.